So we're going to record now. So thanks for coming, everybody. It's so good to see you. Such a good group. And most of you I know, some of you I don't. So I'm excited to get to know you a little bit here. I was telling Maria before we all started here that this is one of the most easy intros I've had to do because I just love Maria so much for so many reasons. So we met originally when she was at Chicago Portfolio School, coming in to build up the instruction as the associate director there and run the school. So we met and bonded over that because we had very kind of similar positions there and kind of handing over the torch and moving forward from there. And after that, she's had some amazing roles at places like 72U, at 72 and Sunny agency there. Building up a whole university, offering a school educational offering inside of an advertising agency. And then she was at IDEO, then at Dropbox, Autobox, Mother, another large advertising agency, digital agency. So she's had some amazing places that she's brought her creative talent strategist role and just exuberance and brilliance to all of these different places. And I even talk about her in my new book about how she developed her own resume to be just so innovative and interesting and different than anything I had ever seen. So she inspires so many people every day with what she does. And I just got to see her in person in LA a few months ago, and Kaz was there also. So good to see you, Kaz. And yeah, so, just really excited to hear from her about a project she calls Peoplescape that she worked on several years ago here in Chicago. And, it's just really stuck with me as just such a special project about humanity and community building and empathy. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Maria.
Oh, thank you so much, Erin. Wow, it's feels really good to be here and to be invited to share this story. At first I was like, gosh, this was so long ago. The project was like 15 years ago. Does she really want me to talk about that? And then, even though it has had and continues to have a profound impact on me, I'm so appreciative of the invitation to really revisit the project, where I made a new friend every day for a year, because it just reminds me how deeply embedded the insights that I gained from that year are in the work that I do, the art that I do, the work that I do. And so I'm going to talk about the story, the social experiment, and then I'm going to pull a few insights and relate them in a work context and how you can design for belonging and connection, among colleagues. So I'm going to share my screen and okay, great. So designing for belonging. I'm a creative talent strategist. And so that means I work with organizations to help them attract, nurture, and retain top creative talent. And I'm also the creator of Friend a Day Project. So this story starts in New York City. I was about 5 years into my career as an art director. And on paper, my life looked great. I was working on Madison Avenue. I was doing Super Bowl commercials, eating at Nobu, living the life. But underneath that surface, I was really in a rut personally and professionally. And I could feel it in my body. I was having different, chronic hives and restless leg syndrome and these kind of weird physical reactions to kind of the day-to-day stress. But it wasn't until I woke up to this bald spot that appeared overnight on the top of my head that I knew I needed to make a big change. It was my body's way of yelling at me, you've got to get out of this situation. And so I decided I needed to make a big change. I left New York. I left the guy I thought I was going to marry. I, quit my advertising job and moved to Chicago. And so this was all great. I grew up in Chicago, but I hadn't been there. I'd never lived there as an adult. So it felt like a totally new city. And I was heartbroken and kind of figuring out what is my identity. My identity was very much tied up in being an art director in New York and this kind of high-powered life. And so I was landing on my feet in Chicago, but very much kind of figuring out who I was, what do I, who am I now? Landed a job at Chicago Portfolio School, which ended up being a dream job. And it's when I really discovered my love for nurturing creative talent and then, next generation of creative leaders. It's where I met Erin. And it was quite an intense and great day. During the days, I kind of felt like air traffic control. There was about 100 students and managing about 30 instructors. And so it was kind of just, managing that community. And about a month into this new life, I realized something was missing, and it was friends. That moment, it occurred to me, what if I made a new friend every day for a year and document it as a social experiment? I'm someone that I always have a project. If you ask me at any point in my life, what project are you? I will have at least one. And I didn't have a project. And so this was a way that felt very kind of efficient. It was a project and, which I needed, and I didn't have any friends. So it was kind of 2 for 1. So I didn't overthink it. I decided to start that day. And I met Hannah Fisher. She was my June 9th, 2007, which is when the project kicked off. And I had 3 simple rules. It had to be a significant social exchange. I had to feel a connection, and I couldn't go home until I made a friend. And so I counted this, when I say friend, it really was having a connection with a stranger, and meaning I could tell you personal things about them. There was some sense of shared vulnerability and storytelling between the 2 of us. And so it was a wild year, as you can imagine. The first few months were so hard. I still remember viscerally in my body, waking up every morning and feeling the weight of like, oh my God, who am I going to meet today? And then also feeling this intense physical relief when I had met my person for that day. I was like, oh, I'm off the hook, especially if it was earlier in the day, meaning I didn't have to go out at night. These were some of the people I met, and it's been now almost 15 years, so I can't remember the details of our interactions, but I do remember kind of how it felt to kind of go out there every day and be open, to be curious. This project really taught me how to be curious. I ask way more questions now than I did before this project. And it also helped me relate to all sorts of people. I found myself with this project having this agenda of like, who am I going to meet today? I walked through a world a lot more open. I found myself holding back judgment and being like more curious about people. I found myself seeking people that were different from me, and realized that you learn more about yourself by interacting with people that are more different from you. Like you don't learn. There's more to learn from being in a diverse group or talking to someone who's quite different from you. And I also realized too, like, going out of your comfort zone is a choice and a practice. And so having this project allowed me to do that. It was interesting. There were sometimes I got rejected, and I didn't take it personally. The project felt like a shield in a way, where for the few times I did get rejected, people didn't want to participate. I would think to myself, oh, they're not rejecting me, they're rejecting the project. And I wish I still had some sort of shield like that now, right? Like that year I had this kind of extra shield that gave me more courage. But so back to the structure of the project, I would go out at night. I'd have my full kind of very busy day job. And then most of the time I hadn't met someone new that day. And so I would go out at night, and I had whole systems. I would go to meetup groups. I basically said yes to everything I was invited to. Sometimes getting my, weaseling and getting invitations, going to different types of meetup groups that I wouldn't have gone to otherwise. Being kind of bold and introducing myself to people. One thing I realized is the first 20 seconds are the hardest when you're meeting someone. If you can get past that first 20 seconds, it's, that really is where the fear is, or where the I think what holds people back is like that initial entry point in conversation. Here's some more of the characters I met. And it was really interesting too, when I would get into a conversation with people looking for that common ground, and that almost felt like a game. What is the thing that we share? What can we find? What can we both relate to together? What was I going to say? It took anywhere from 30 minutes to 12 hours to make a friend. And because, it would take time to get to know someone, or to even start talking to a stranger. And then, we'd kind of let that play out. I tried to wait as long as possible before telling people about the project, because as soon as they knew, it would change the dynamic, right? Then our conversations were about the project as opposed to really getting to know each other. And so I kind of learned that. I was really through this. It took a few months to really get comfortable, or get a little bit more comfortable being uncomfortable, and kind of dialing in the process. But I waited, so I would get to know them and really tried to create an authentic connection. What was, interesting too, is oftentimes they were the ones that came up to me to start the conversation. And so then I would let it play out. And at the end, as we were about to part ways, is when I would say, oh, by the way, I'm doing this project where I'm making a new friend. Will you be and I would say that the day's date would be my February 2nd. And by giving this invitation and kind of making it almost this ritual, this formality, also, I think it impacted, it put our relationship and our connection almost, I don't want to say on a pedestal, but it ritualized it. It honored it. It made it special. They felt seen. They felt a part of something. I would give them, then I had these business cards that I made. This was my friend a day pack. I never left the house without my digital camera. You can see the business cards. At that point, I hadn't called it Peoplescape. It was growing a map, so I'm kind of figuring out, what is this thing? Like, how do I, name it? And on the business card too, it says, thank you for being and I would fill in the date. I filled about 17 notebooks. This is one example. And I had waivers because I didn't know what I was going to do with this. And so I would also have them just, get permission. Can I, I was thinking about having a gallery show. And so could I have your permission to share our story and your photo in a gallery exhibition? But this project dictated my life. And ironically, there was something very freeing about not having control. Everything was in service of this project. So I would meet someone new and, I'd get invited somewhere and it was like, well, am I going to meet someone new there? And so all of my decision-making was around, in service of this project of meeting new people and getting out there. I'm an extrovert, although as I get older, I'm become more and more of an introvert. And even for extroverts, this was really very taxing. And some people, and I'm sure we've all experienced that, can give you energy when you've had coffee with them, or, at a lunch or whatever, you're like, God, I feel energized. And then other people can really drain you. And it was so interesting to kind of feel that flow, between people, and just take it all in, and hold space for people, even when they were draining. So as you can imagine, Chicago, doing this 365 days, and then like in the dead of winter in Chicago, when you just don't feel like being social or you're tired, there were moments where I was like, I don't think I can do this. I don't think I can finish it. But that's what kind of peer pressure came in to really save the day, to be honest. People think peer pressure is always negative, but actually, the project was very public, so everyone in the school, all my students and instructors and friends, everyone knew about the project. It was like day 180, day 181, and so I had people, think of instructors or people who'd show up to the school and be like, who'd you meet yesterday? And I would tell them. And so that kept me going, because there was every day the stakes were getting higher. What, am I going to quit on day 205? So that was really helpful. It kind of was the equivalent of being like cheered on in a marathon, where you just don't think you can run. You got to maybe start walking. And then you turn the corner, and there's like a whole group that are like just wildly cheering. You find that extra energy. So the project, this is Jessamy, and she was my March 4th. And if it hadn't been for her, she became a dear friend. So she was a stranger turned, dear friend, and then also producer and she was the one who really, I credit her with helping me finish it. I know I would not have finished and done the gallery show and finished all the writing had it not been for her. And at one point, at my lowest point, because it's not just going out and meeting people, which takes energy, time, finances. I mean, really sacrificed sleep, sacrificed kind of everything I had. But then it was going home and writing the story about a narrative. I didn't mention that earlier, but after I'd meet people, and got to know them and formally asked them to be part of the project. And they said yes, I would photograph them. And then I would go home and write a 200 or 300 narrative about the encounter and what we talked about and that sort of thing. And so there was a lot of extra work, right? Then it was all like the writing that I had to do after each new person. So Jessamy came in at my lowest, darkest hour, where I really just didn't think I could pull off the meeting people and a gallery show. And she said, yes, you are. Get kind of some tough love that I very much needed. And I'm going to help you. It just gives me goosebumps even, and so she was my coach, my producer. And really, I owe it to her. And so it's a good reminder of, I want to be that person in other people's lives of like, when you see someone who's like working towards something and they're stuck, or they just need that little extra push, and kind of keeping an eye out for that. Who is that person? Because I don't even like to think about if she had not stepped in, just what this kind of unrealized potential, this unrealized idea that continues to have an impact on me and other people as well. So we did complete it, spoiler, and I ended up meeting 412 people that year, because sometimes I met more than one person in a day. And for about 5, this is always a question that people ask, and so you probably have this in your mind, how many people did I keep in touch with? After the first 5 years, I was about 10%. Now it's faded. These people come in and out of my life, and but I would say I kept in touch and had relationships, friendships with about 10% of the people 5 years later. And we pulled off the gallery show, which meant like writing and then editing all of the stories. And that's just, I mean, I late at night, probably 3 a.m, the day before putting the gallery together, just hugging like, oh my gosh. We did it. And then it felt very exposing, right? So I wanted to share it. So I'd completed this social experiment and had written about each one and had a gallery show in Chicago. So this 5,000 square foot gallery space, totally empty, except for a timeline of a poster for every day of the year. So it was the date that I met the person, the photo I took of them when we met, and then the story. And I didn't realize how vulnerable that was going to be to share. It's like basically putting your journal pages on a gallery wall. I just felt very exposed. So I only kept it up for 2 days. We had about 350 people that showed up to the gallery to read all of them. And I think it was 88 people from the project that showed up to the gallery as well. I didn't want people, I was very concerned. I didn't want people to feel like they were either in the in group or the out group. This was a huge celebration, like literally 350 people were at the opening, but only 88 people were actually in the project. And so I designed a mechanism. So the cost of entry, the way I solved that was to turn the whole thing into a performance. So the cost of entry into the gallery show was answering a question: what have you done that no one else in the room has done? And when they turned their answer in, they got someone else's, and they were challenged to find the person whose answer they have. And so now now everyone was participating. This turned into a passive, let's look at art on a wall, that's something maybe we're not involved with, into, the art is the interactions between people. The art is us. It ended up being a great mechanism for both introverts and extroverts, because the introverts were like, oh, thanks for the permission to go up to strangers. Hell no. But I'll hold on to my card, and this is kind of an interesting fact. And then the extroverts were like, oh my gosh, I now have a ticket to walk up to anyone and start a conversation. And it was so great to see groups of people. They would, get an interesting tidbit, go up to someone, right? Like, is this you? And oftentimes it wasn't, right? What are the chances? But then that started a conversation. Or oftentimes too, there would be groups of people like, oh my gosh, I don't know, that's not me, but I want to find out with you. And then there would be groups of people going up to others to try to solve the mystery. Here were some of them, and they were fantastic. I mean, they're just some of them, let's see, tried out for the NFL, met extraterrestrial life, had lunch in Dubrovnik 2 weeks ago, mapped natural disasters in Nepal. I mean, there were just these wild, lived in Kuwait for 18 years. I mean, they ended up just being wild little tidbits that started great conversations for people. So the project was a success. I mean, I felt so proud of myself. I'd never done anything so grand before, that took everything that I had, and it gave me a lot of confidence, because, it's like, gosh, if I could pull this off, what else am I capable of? So that was a really profound experience. And then the next day happened, and I woke up, and I mean, this sounds silly to admit now, but I really thought I was going to wake up and feel changed. Like I was going to be a new person, right? Like I did the project, and like I've walked through the threshold, to the other side. And so when I woke up and didn't feel flooded with insights, I actually thought the project was a failure. I was like, wow, I don't feel like I've learned anything. I don't feel like I've changed. And it wasn't until and there was interest in having me write a memoir. And when I sat down to write, nothing came out. I was too close to it. It was only, honestly, it took a couple years to really make sense and really start to see the impact of the project. Um, and I wasn't the only one. It was nice to, um, to be reminded that people in the project felt a part of something and it had a big impact on them. This is Terrell. He was one of my people, friends of the day. And look, this is 10 years later. This is on Facebook, his 10-year anniversary. And he's still, kind of proud and identifying with it. That was something I didn't mention earlier in explaining the project too, is that when I asked them to be my person for the day, people really took on the identity. Like I would get phone calls like, hey, Maria, it's your June 7th. I'm like, oh, hey, June 7th, how are you? Like, you won't believe who I met. I met your May 6th. So I hear kind of these stories that really people identifying with the project. Here was another one, the April 18th. He reaches out to me on his anniversary every year, just to say hi and check in. So this really did have a profound impact, kind of on people involved and definitely myself. So now it's been 15 years and I'm so appreciative of this kind of invitation to reflect on those learnings. And, I gave a TEDx talk, I pulled out insights from that, which you can watch, but I wanted to, knowing this audience and having, you know, um, the work that I do now, wanted to share some fresh insights from an old project and how it relates to designing for belonging and connection, especially now, we're in this hybrid world and, reading all these statistics about, employees really feeling disconnected. And, we don't have that physical office space where kind of impromptu, spontaneity happens and kind of these little interstitial moments that we took for granted. So here's a couple things that, kind of in reflecting on that project and in the work I do now has helped kind of design for belonging. So thinking about the invitation. And, I mentioned earlier, 80% of the time, I wasn't the person that initiated the conversation. I counted up 412 people because I wanted to know, I was like, did I start the conversations? 80% of the time I didn't, which was very interesting. I was the one with the agenda. I couldn't go home until I made a friend. And yet I only started the conversation 20% of the time. And in doing research, I realized actually I did start the conversation. It just wasn't verbal. It was with my body language. And so it's something to remember. And this was a statistic by a body language researcher that just shocks me, but I believe it, that really only 7% of how we communicate is with our words. And so thinking about having screens on, or, how do you convey body language through the screen, and then of course in person, I think of, networking events when you go, or any kind of in-person event, it's so easy to we want to pull out our phones when we don't have, we don't have someone to talk to. It's like, it just feels awkward to just stand there. But as soon as you pull out your phone, you're telling people, don't talk to me. And so my challenge here, myself and other people, is when you're wanting to connect with people in a physical space, resist the urge, and it's really hard, to pull out your phone or to look busy. Because if you stand there for a few minutes and it's awkward, but kind of stand open and available, like ready, people are much more likely to come up to you, and I bet they will, right? Because no one wants to pull out their phone to like fill in that space. So one example here, this was at Mother. I love this example of the kind of the invitation for belonging. For all new hires, they put up your mother's photo. And so it's all of mother's photos. I remember feeling so proud to see my mother's picture up there, like, oh, I'm one of them, you know. The picture on the right was when I was doing some contract work for Dropbox, and wasn't even a full-time employee, but was, going to be doing a long-term contract. And I remember showing up that first day and finding this on my desk and just feeling really welcomed. Like you belong. This is your invitation to, be a part of what we're doing here. When I was at Mother as well, I got hired 3 weeks before the pandemic started. So that was wild. And I started a mentoring, we call it T sessions, and pairing people up throughout the company to have personal connections, not talk about work, just talk about you and connect on a personal level. And I knew that, or I wanted to provide some structure, right? It can be awkward, even if it's just one-on-one with a stranger, someone you work with, but still you don't really know that well. And so I created a series of questions to help kind of guide the conversation. Again, that like designing for that first 20 seconds. Once they start going, they're going to be fine. But how do you provide a little structure or, just an invitation into a conversation? Here's another example. Like invitations can be kind of, I like thinking about them creatively. This was a retreat for Carhartt that I did recently. And to kick off this offsite, we had them pull talisman. And so each one, you can see on the right, these are different talisman, different symbols. We went around, we had them pull one. And this was their invitation. You've just stepped into a full day of like connection and belonging, of vulnerability. And it was just kind of and gave them an entry point to connect with each other. Well, because while it was a team, a lot of them had never interacted with each other, right? They were virtual, and so they were only interacting with the small group of people that they work with on a day-to-day basis. Another insight was about vulnerability. I noticed through the Friend a Day project that when I was vulnerable, it invited other people to be. And I noticed when people were vulnerable with me, I trusted them more. And so that was something that I took with me through my work. And one example, so when I was running 72U, which is a talent accelerator inside 72andSunny, it attracted talent from all over the globe, all over the world. And we had 3 intense months together. We wanted to make the most of our time together. So on the first day, I had everyone share 3 turning points in their life. Now I gave them a heads up so they had time to think about it before they showed up on the first day. And by asking that question, I went first so I could model vulnerability. It helped them all. They could choose how vulnerable to be. Some people got very vulnerable. There'd be tears. And so they were in control of how much they wanted to be vulnerable. But that exercise kind of was an instantly built trust. Like you could just see the shift. And so by that end of the first day, I felt like we were way ahead of where we'd have been had I not like created space for us to be vulnerable with each other. Giving full attention and deeply listening. Oh my gosh, this is so hard. I mean, it's active. People think of listening as passive. It's active. It's hard to do. Honestly, I was very good at it while I was doing the project because I knew I had to go home and write a story about the encounter. It's hard to do. I'm not as good at it because I don't have the pop quiz in a few hours. So I try to remember, I try to tap into that practice because, being on both ends of it, it says, I see you, I care about you. And yeah, it's just really powerful. It creates a sense of connection and belonging. This was further in the day with Carhartt. Um, this was a 30-person group, and it's so easy. Their life had been pretty transactional, as a lot of companies, we don't have those in-between moments. And so this was about getting them out in nature and facilitating space for them to connect. No devices, no distractions, small groups, some prompts. This was a reflective hike that we did. So I gave them a hike, or gave them a prompt, like, how do you want your coworkers to view you? How do you want to be seen among your coworkers, as an example? And so we would silently walk and reflect for a few minutes, and then they would pair up and share. And it felt so good to hold the space. We did all these wild things too. It was this kind of like epic montage day. And when I asked them at the end, went around and kind of like surveyed them, what was their favorite moment, unanimously, like, they all said this moment. And this was kind of more of the quieter moment. We did like underground kayaking. We did these like crazy creative adventure. They loved too, but it was this invitation and holding space for them to just be vulnerable with each other. That was their favorite part of the day. And then designing with intention, building mechanisms for participation and contribution. These are key to feeling a sense of belonging. We are pack animals. People eagerly want to be a part of something bigger than themselves. There's so many ways to do this. This was at IDEO in San Francisco. Erin, I don't know if they did this in Chicago, IDEO Chicago, but every 2 weeks, I think, this is in the bathroom, they would put up a question. And so you kind of privately could answer. And it was just so you felt a part of something. This is just a small moment, private moment with paper and, Sharpies. And yet it created this sense of, oh, I'm part of something bigger. What I have to say matters. So really, really powerful. And then I think this is the last one, is that rituals create meaning. Rituals bring people together through a shared action or intention, and it communicates what's important to a group, right? This was with 72U. We had so many rituals. One of them was we started every day with meditation, group meditation, and sharing inspiration. So the first 30 minutes of every morning was, I think we did 15 minutes of meditation, and then each person would take a turn and put a presentation together, something they're passionate about or something to inspire the group. And that's just one example of the many rituals we had, but that communicated, hey, well-being matters. Feeling a part of the group. We started promptly at 9:30. And then inspiration. We want to know, inspiring each other matters. Sharing your point of view, all of those things. So there's a lot, rituals, thinking about kind of the rituals that you have and what they are implicitly communicating. And then lastly, curiosity over judgment. With the project, I really let myself be surprised by people. When in doubt, I'd ask questions. Curiosity was my co-pilot. And it changed me. The project, I became a much more curious person, which is a mindset, but also a behavior. And I continue. I'm like kind of known for asking a lot of questions, which I'm proud of, because normally kids are known for asking a lot of questions. So this translated with 72U, I would bring in guest speakers for internally too, but externally. And I wasn't quite sure how they'd fit in. I'm like, I'd meet someone interesting in the world. I'm like, this doesn't really relate to the work we're doing right now, but I want to expose the group to a different perspective. Who knows what seed this will plant. And so it was just nice to kind of not have it all figured out, to just kind of have an intuition, or tapping into intuition and inviting people to share without knowing exactly what the outcome will be, or why it's important. So those are just some of the kind of fresh insights as it relates to designing for belonging and connection. And so I know we'll have some Q&A, but I also want to challenge kind of all of us to think about now, like, what are moments of belonging in your everyday life, personally and professionally? And then, like, what are ways that you can, once you notice them, then you can maybe design more of them. So I will stop sharing my screen.
That was awesome, Maria. Amazing. I'm always so inspired by what you share and how you frame things. So thank you. That was so, so beautiful. I would love to just ask the first question and then hand it over to you all to ask any question, big or small. But I would just love to hear more about the 3 turning points framing. That is beautiful and so insightful. So I'd love to hear what people said. I know you said some people were very emotional about it, but was anybody funny? Did they bring levity to it? Like, what were some of those reactions? How did people respond?
Yeah, I mean, the whole gamut, because I had a new cohort every 3 months. And so this became kind of a ritual I would do. Um, Gosh, it was the whole gamut. I mean, sometimes people would talk about loss, um, people they love that they lost, or they would talk about, opportunities that landed in their lap, or sometimes they would talk about even a conversation. Like, so it could be like really big things or really small moments of that became a turning point. Oh, and it's when someone said this to me, and for the first time I realized, I saw myself in a new way, or so I don't remember details now, but I remember it being like really a spectrum of humanity.
Mm-hmm. Amazing.
It was also telling too what people shared. I remember one person in particular in a group, all of his turning points they weren't vulnerable at all. And so that's interesting. It's like, okay, that's where you're at. So it was telling the stories that, and the level of vulnerability that people shared with that prompt.
Yeah, I would imagine that, just like where are people coming in on that sort of level setting of how much people are willing to share right away versus 2 months later. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, and I had forgotten a detail about your project around my June 9th, my March 12th. I just love that so much. I've always loved that, but I'd forgotten that detail because for me, it makes me just appreciate and think about the fact that time is something we don't get back. And labeling that time and that day with a person makes it so profoundly special. And the bond happens through that. Just the way you set that up, and that people still reach out to you on their anniversary of the project is just so cool. So
Yeah. It was interesting too, because I don't think I've mentioned this before, but on vulnerability, I was really vulnerable, with asking a stranger, like, hey, will you help me complete my mission? Like, if they said no, and I probably maybe got about 7 rejections. If they said no, I had to start over. And so that was something too that was bonding. They knew that there was, we just met, I was asking a favor, will you participate, kind of holding out my hand, are you going to accept it, or turn the other way? That also kind of, I think, built the trust and the connection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, amazing. Well, yeah, like if you all have questions, feel free to ask them, verbally if you're comfortable, or put them in the chat, and Sarah and I can ask Maria on your behalf if that's your preference. So who might like to start and jump in? Sarah.
I have a question. We were talking before everybody got in here. I am definitely an introvert, so I have a hard time, especially with those first, I forget what you said, if it was like 20 seconds of the conversation. So I wondered, like, what your did you have any go-to questions that would get people talking every single time? Or like, what are some of those good things to break people open?
Oh gosh, that's such a good question. I think at the time I did probably have a few questions in my back pocket. I also was contextual, so I would kind of pick up clues. What was great was meetups. I did a lot of meetups were big back then. And so I did a lot of meetups, or affinity groups. And that was really helpful because it's like, okay, we already have something in common. And so I would usually use that as a springboard for conversation. Um, it's interesting because like that first year, the small talk is, I used to hate small talk. And I have a complicated relationship with it, but small talk's really valuable. And, I think now, especially since we've been separated, that first year of the pandemic, we realized, oh my gosh, actually, small talk plays an important role. Who would have thought in kind of finding that common ground and feeling, just uh, feeling humanity. I think there's some statistics too around the benefits, the physical health benefits of having, a certain amount of small talk. But I also like to get past it too, because you don't really build the trust. It's like trust takes vulnerability, and vulnerability is like sharing. So I use this deck of cards called Big Talk. I don't know if anyone's heard of it. And there's different types of decks of cards where there are these prompts, like one question, that I use with the card cards, like what's something that you want your coworkers to know about you, or what's an aspiration, things, those types of questions where it really kind of gets beyond that surface level. And I have the deck of cards, and I sometimes will take them with me if I'm going to like a conference or a place where I'm going to be like, oh, there's people that want to connect. There's gonna be a whole bunch of strangers. Let me bring this deck of cards so I have them in my back pocket. That's what I would recommend. And even when I'm meeting a new person, like for lunch or coffee, I might pull out and be like, hey, let's do a question first. Yeah.
I have a question, Maria.
Yeah.
I'm Karina. As we have a lot of people still in virtual and in hybrid now modes, what are your insights and thoughts about creating belonging and connection and some of those rituals in a virtual and hybrid world?
Yeah. The hybrid is tricky. I feel like that's our new cusp.
Mm-hmm.
With the virtual, it was, the like employee resource groups, the affinity groups for sure, because we have so many multiple identities. So it's like, how can you tap into people's like passions or identities and get smaller groups? If you've noticed, like the larger the group, especially virtual, the less likely people are to talk. And so, the kind of doing breakout rooms is huge, where you're getting, smaller groups so people can talk more, and it feels less intimidating. But yeah, so I'd say figuring out breaking down larger groups into smaller groups, and that can be, just breakouts. Trying to match people up based on passion or identity. And I mean, those would probably be the core. I'm curious, what have you tried, or is there a certain context or a group of people you're trying to?
I work for a big corporate giant consulting firm, and we're global, and we run the gamut from anywhere from technology trainings to strategy consulting to our corporate functions teams like our finance groups. And yeah, we're staying virtual for a while longer, and it's I don't know, trying to convey that, build those connections, convey that people are in a valued space, that we're valuing their development. And I don't know, so it's just trying to get people excited to come to virtual when they're really, really ready to be flown somewhere and to co-locate and to have concentrated time together. And that's kind of the context where I'm coming from.
Yeah. What I've noticed too is giving people a little homework. ahead of time when it makes sense. But I've noticed when in my own self, when I have a prompt or some kind of homework that I need to think about and bring to a virtual space, I'm more invested. And so that could be another opportunity. Then now they've got some skin in the game. Also finding ways to invite people to be more personal, like to share of themselves personally, because, it's so transactional with the virtual space. We're doing work, everyone's got all these meetings. So you want to be sensitive to taking up more screen time. But so it's like, how can you, and one way to do that, even kicking off a team meeting, is spending the first 5 minutes sharing something personal, like having a prompt or where people get to share of themselves. So that could be a way to think about, like, each meeting, maybe if it's a 30-minute meeting, spending 5 minutes being humans together.
Yeah.
Because it goes such a long way. It might seem like, oh, but that's not work. But what I've found is, like, spending time not talking about work actually helps people work better. Yeah. What else? Any other kind of questions or insights that people have discovered around this?
I have a question if no one's jumping in.
Yeah.
So if this was great, if I was at your gallery, I definitely would have held on to my card until someone came and spoke to me. But as you were talking, I was thinking about ending conversations, because I realized so many of the interactions that I have a predetermined time of when they end for meetings and things like this. But when you're at a conference or something and you're having a conversation with someone, I find it awkward, and this may just be me, to end a conversation when I'm enjoying the conversation, or when the conversation kind of hit a peak. And so I was wondering if you had any insights on that.
God, Ruben, that is a good question. I struggle with that myself. I usually fall back on, I need to use the restroom, or, there was some statistic I read that, like, basically no one ends conversations when they want to. Usually someone wants it to go longer and someone wants it to end sooner. And I don't know what the solve is for that. I think we've all been on both ends of that. And how do you kind of bow out of a conversation or end a conversation gracefully?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is a good question. There's something kind of a nice relief to having an outside force dictate the end. I don't have an answer for that. I wish I did, because that it's awkward for both people. Like, oh, did I talk too much? Or like, oh my gosh, this person's not picking up my body language that I need to go.
Exactly.
It's an interesting reflection on one person. The people aren't aligned in that expectation. That's really interesting. Yeah. I have one more. If I'm just looking around the room here, we have a few more minutes. I just have another question about. I was looking at those screens of the portraits of everybody in one of your first, second, third slides, and one of them was like cardboard cutouts, like not the human face of somebody. So it just got me thinking, was there anybody that was uncomfortable with having their story included, and how did you navigate that so that they did get included, or did they not get included? How did that work?
There were a few people, actors and lawyers, who were like, I don't want to be I don't want you to, I could take their picture, but they didn't want to be in the gallery, or they didn't want to be public. And so at first I'm like, oh my gosh, how am I going to solve that? Because I need to have proof, it's like, they're not playing by the rules here. And so what I did was I included everyone, but I pixelated. There was like, I think only maybe 3 or 4 people that either had a story, for various reasons and understandably, didn't want to be made public. And so I included their story, but they were anonymous, is the way I handled it. And I just pixelated. And in fact, it actually made it more enticing, which I didn't even realize, but it's like, oh, now I want it. Now this person's face is pixelated. What's the story here? So it ended up, that was my solve for it. But there was a moment where I was like really kind of having existential crisis about it.
Let's see that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Maria. We
Yeah.
all, I think I can speak for everyone that we all enjoyed hearing your story today, and it was inspiring and gave us some great things to think about. And I think we can all call you a friend now. So thank you so much for sharing with us today. We're so grateful for your time, and join us next month on March 2nd for our next Inspiration Hour. Thanks everybody for joining.
Thanks,
Good
everyone.
to see you all. Have a great day.
Thanks.